Before we get started on another loaded Lakers report, do us a favor here at Chat Sports and share this video. There are a few ways you can do that. You can retweet us on Twitter at Chat Sports. You can share this video on Facebook at Chat Sports NBA. And tell your friends about what we're doing here on the Lakers Report. Laker Nation continues to grow here at Chat Sports. We just surpassed 35,000 subscribers. We're bringing you all of the latest news and rumors as the playoffs approach. We have you covered. And coming up later, we're going to bring you some NBA draft prospect profiles, 3 guys who the Lakers could target. We're doing all of that here on the channel, so help us out, help us continue to grow, and also subscribe to the Lakers Report at youtube.com/LakersTV. This is the Lakers Report by Chat Sports. I am your host, Chase Sr. Let's get into the latest injury news on Anthony Davis, because it was expected that Davis could either return on Saturday against the Jazz or on Monday against the Jazz. That is not going to happen, so it appears as though Anthony Davis could return during the Lakers' 4-game road trip coming up. Isn't it crazy to think that Anthony Davis hasn't rocked the purple and gold since February 14th because of that calf and Achilles strain? It has been way too long, but he's ramped up his basketball activity. He's starting to get healthy, and without LeBron James in the lineup, Anthony Davis is going to provide this team with a major boost, especially if he's near 100%. Now, Frank Vogel said last week he's not going to right away play around 30 minutes per night. They're going to ease him into the action. But with the NBA playoffs coming up on May 22nd, Anthony Davis figures to be able to kind of ramp up his activity leading up to the playoffs and be full strength once the postseason comes. Here's a look at the Lakers' next 5 games. That back-to-back against Utah, not going to play tonight, as I mentioned, as we record this on Monday. Maybe he'll return during one of the 2 games against the Dallas Mavericks in Dallas on the 22nd and the 24th. If not, an opportunity for AD to get back on the floor on the 26th against the Orlando Magic, or maybe on the 28th against the Washington Wizards. The Lakers have certainly missed him, and we're talking about one of the best number 2 options across the NBA, who at times throughout his NBA career has been a borderline top 10 player. There's no doubt Anthony Davis is a stud. Now, his numbers this year, not as great as last year, when in the regular season he had one of his best seasons ever, and in the playoffs burst onto the scene as a clutch performer, but this year, still really, really good. And he's not going to put these numbers up when he returns to the floor right away. Be patient with this guy. It's all about getting him healthy for the playoffs. But when he is healthy and upright, he is a top 10 player. So Laker Nation, he hasn't played since mid-February. I imagine you're really excited for AD to rock the purple and gold once again, especially when LeBron James is back in the lineup. Tell me about your excitement level for AD's return. Get into the comments, hop on board and join the show. Scale it for me from 1 to 100. I'm going to go all the way up to 90 because I'm excited to see AD back on the floor. As for Andre Drummond, he's been in and out of the lineup because of that toe injury that he suffered in his debut with the Lakers. He returned over the weekend on Saturday against the Jazz after missing last Thursday's game against the Celtics because of that problematic toe. And he scored a Lakers season high of 27 points in a big win against the Jazz. And to me, Andre Drummond on the floor on Saturday was dominant and looked like the best player on the court without the aforementioned LeBron and AD and Donovan Mitchell as well. Now, Drummond talked to the media about that toe injury that seems to linger, and it's going to be a problem for a little while. This all comes down to him managing that injury, and this is what Andre Drummond had to say. Quote, "I think I'll be fine. It's something that is obviously going to take some time. Anybody that knows injuries like those, it's not something that happens overnight, so sometimes it does flare up every now and again, but more times than not, I'm taking care of it. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do to make sure I can get back out there on the court." And if you watch Andre Drummond on Saturday, it didn't look like he missed a beat. It didn't look like he was suffering at all in terms of pain from that toe injury. He lost his big right toenail. Like, it totally came off. That sounds really painful and something that could maybe affect him down the road, but eventually he's going to get back to full strength and he'll be all good. But if you watched him on Saturday against the Jazz, again, Didn't look like he was in pain at all. He had his best game as a Laker and really one of his best games of his career. 30 minutes, 10 of 15 from the floor, 27 points and 8 rebounds. And I watched the game live. I went back and rewatched it, and I was really impressed with what Drummond did, but also how Frank Vogel used him. And I think we saw a sneak peek as to how the Lakers might implement him into the offense once LeBron and AD come back. I was really impressed with his ability to pass out of the high post. He found spot-up shooters. He also found cutters. He's a better passer than I think a lot of people give him credit for. Also, Frank Vogel used him in pick and rolls as well as pick and pops. There was one moment where he hit a floater, and I'm like, a 7-footer hitting a floater? I'm down with that. He also got out in transition, and we got to see Andre Drummond's athleticism on display, which with the Cleveland Cavaliers, he was out for a while when they tried to find a partner to trade him to. It ended up being a buyout, as we know. But to see the athletic force that Drummond is on display was really nice to see. He's, of course, going to be dangerous catching lobs, but if there is one concern with Drummond, he didn't play down the stretch in the fourth quarter, and this is something that I talked about a couple weeks ago. Few reasons for that. He's a terrible free throw shooter, and he can also get picked apart defensively when he's going up against other athletic bigs. But for the most part, when he was on the floor, Andre Drummond was the best player on the court between the Lakers and the Jazz, and that's really saying something because there was a lot of talent on the floor on Saturday at the Staples Center. So grade Andre Drummond's performance against the Jazz for me. A, B, C, D, or F. I want you to play the scout. I'm going to give him an A. Had his best game as a Laker, one of his best games of this season. Andre Drummond was certainly balling out. Today's Lakers Report is brought to you by our friends at Newsbreak. So I was hanging out and kicking it with some people over the weekend. I tried crawfish for the first time because we're based here in Dallas, and I guess that's a big thing. And we were having a conversation about a bunch of different topics going on in the world right now. And my friend said to me, you know, Chase, you seem really well-rounded and on top of all the current events going on out there when it comes to local news, weather, crime, politics, pop culture, food, and as you know, sports, because I'm just spitting hard facts here on the Lakers Report. And I said, you know how I've been able to stay up to date with everything? It's all because of the Newsbreak app. So you can do the same, and you can be like me and be a well-rounded dude who knows what he's talking about with some common folk when you're trying to make some friends. So go to chatsports.com/LakersNB, download the Newsbreak app right now on your iPhone or Android device, and therefore you get all of your local news from your local news sources on one single feed. You can even type in your zip code, and you get it all right there for you. And while you're there, hey, we have a Lakers Report page on Newsbreak. So go to chatsports.com/LakersNB, search Lakers Report, and give us a follow. You're watching the Los Angeles Lakers Report by Chat Sports. I am your host, Chase Sr., and the NBA draft might be coming up in July, but it's never too early to look at some possible prospects that the Lakers could target in the first round when they pick somewhere in the 20s, maybe last in the NBA draft if they win the NBA championship. So I put together this list of prospects of players who could be there on the board for the Lakers to target. Jared Butler, guard out of Baylor. Trey Mann, guard out of Florida. And David Duke, guard out of Providence. So we're going guard heavy here in terms of looking at these prospects. And let's start off with Jared Butler. A lot of you are familiar with him after he helped lead Baylor to the national championship in that dominant, impressive win over Gonzaga. For me, Jared Butler is a really graceful athlete at 6'3", 195 pounds. He already has size that translates to the NBA level. And the Lakers, if they decide to move on from Dennis Schroeder, and maybe trade away Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and they try to shed some salary, Jared Butler could be a cheap young guard that's on this roster for the next couple of years, and a guy, because he played for 3 years at Baylor, is experienced enough to play as a rookie on a championship-ready team. He was obviously impressive during that tournament run, and when you saw him, you saw his game on display that this dude can certainly ball. And what I like about Jared Butler, especially as the NBA changes and as shooting becomes more and more important, in his 3 years at Baylor, from the field and from distance, he improved his shooting stroke year in and year out, and if he continues on that trend, that's a good sign. And he only averaged a little less than 5 dimes per night. He has good vision, so I actually think he is a better passer than that 4.8 assists per game number. Let's move on to Tre Mann, guard out of Florida. Another guy who you might have become familiar with in the NCAA tournament, even though the Gators did lose to Oral Roberts in that upset. Tre Mann is a long and lean athlete. I think he can add some bulk, add some muscle to him as he develops as a physical specimen. This is a prospect who took a massive, massive jump from his freshman year with the Gators to his sophomore year. Little more than 5 points per game as a freshman. That number shot up to almost 16 points per game as a sophomore. He shot more than 40% on three-pointers, on almost 5 three-point attempts per night, so there is a little bit of volume there. And the thing that was consistent with Tre Mann when I watched him, he has one go-to move. And yeah, defenders are going to be able to pick up on that over time, but it is a move that certainly plays at the NBA level, and it's a step back. Tre Mann will go to his step back, and it can be a lethal step back, one where he could end up on some highlight reels in the future if he has some defenders falling. So Tre Mann loves his step back, does need to add some weight, and his shooting stroke has improved over the years. Lastly, David Duke out of Providence. David Duke really benefited from staying in college and going to college instead of opting out to go to the NBA draft maybe a year ago. And this is a cat who, if you watch him in a pickup gym, you're like, wow. He's not scared to let it fly. He's not lacking any confidence. And David Duke is a dude who you want on your pickup team, because if you're playing to 16 and you need a guy to get a bucket, David Duke is going to be that guy who rises up and gets you a bucket. Now, his form for me in terms of his shooting stroke is a little hitchy. I'm not talking Sean Marion bad or Lonzo Ball bad when he got out of UCLA, which has actually improved over time. Lakers fans know about that. But it gets hitchy toward the top of his release. And I think that's something over time that he could work on a little bit, eliminating from him, because I think that lends itself to a little bit of inconsistency when it comes to David Duke shooting, and inconsistency is really the biggest weakness for him when it comes to his offensive game, and I think a little bit of that is a product of him having that hitch in his jump shot. So that's something to look out for and to be weary of as he enters the NBA draft. So once again, these three prospects that could be available in the early, mid to late 20s when the Lakers figure to pick in the upcoming NBA draft. Jared Butler out of Baylor, Tre Mann out of Florida, and David Duke out of Providence. Before we head out, we go into the comments and we look at what you all say. So do us a favor, do me a favor, and in the comments below, name a prospect that we should talk about on a future show. If you do that, we'll look at them, we'll see what prospects you come up with, and we'll talk about them and give them a scouting profile coming up on the Lakers Report.